So hi, everybody.
Hello.
I am so excited about this. This has been a long time coming. This is the results of years and years of research. So let us begin delving into the history of our family. Any journey into our family history for me must begin with a tribute to my Aunt Mildred. This was Char's, my mom's sister, who was our family historian. Back in 1974, back when doing so was a Herculean effort, she self-published this hardcover book of oral family history. And that so inspired me as a kid and really lit the fire for me as a genealogist. So I owe a huge debt of gratitude to my Aunt Mimi. So I'm going to start by doing a little context setting and talking about Norway and a little bit of history and language and culture that'll help to understand once we start getting into the records. So just a little bit about geography and how the country is divided. So one step down for us are states, but for Norway, they are counties, or they have been counties. As of January 1st, 2020, the country is reorganized from 18 counties into 11 regions. So there's this major consolidation and reorganization that's happening there as we speak. The next step down is municipalities. And then of most interest genealogically are parishes, and there are over 1,200 of those. And it's at the parish level where records were kept. Records of birth, baptism, confirmation, marriage, vaccinations, death, all that stuff was kept at the parish level. And then parishes are split divided into farms, and many farms are subdivided into kind of sub-farms. So population. In the 19th century, Norway experienced a huge population explosion. In 1800, the population was roughly 750,000, and in 100 years, by 1900, that had grown to 2.25 million. And that did not include the 750,000 who had emigrated during the 19th century. And all of that growth in a country where less than 3% of the land is farmable. That kind of population explosion was just unsustainable. The things that led to that were a combination of better nutrition and hygiene and the introduction of the smallpox vaccine. It was developed in the 1790s and first administered in Norway in 1802, and Norway then took that very seriously, and I'll talk more about that. But for all those reasons and more, the population explosion happened. So a little bit about the Norwegian language. The language is norsk, and the lucky Norwegians have 3 additional vowels, more than we have in English. They have the a, which is sometimes called the ash, the ö, which is sometimes called an o slash, and the o, the a ring. This vowel is the source of our much made fun of Minnesota o. A ring is more of a modern version of what used to be written as double A. So in older records, you'll see it spelled with a double A, and in later records with the A ring. Now, spelling variations. Culturally, there just was no expectation that there was a correct way to spell names. So you'll see a lot of variation of names, all referring to the same people or the same place, but just slight variations. Under normal circumstances, as a genealogist, that would raise red flags that you're talking about different people, but this is so common at this time in Norway. For instance, the evolution of our name, Hovick, in early 19th century records, it appears this way: Haavig, Håvik. Mid-19th century records, the G switches to a K, and then by the late 19th century, the double A is replaced by the A ring, and that's the way it has remained now until current. So husman, our people were husmans for the most part, tenant farmers who held a lease from the owner of a farm. Some leases included their own piece of land, and that was referred to as mejød, with land. And some leases were only for a small dwelling, and then the husman served as a farm laborer. Lease payments could be in money or an agreed upon number of days of labor each year, or a combination of those. In records, husman is most often abbreviated HMD, and husman's wife is a hustru, Hustru. Now, you may all be familiar with this, but the whole patronymic naming system, I'm going to just briefly go through. So before the 20th century in Norway, the idea of a permanent surname that would be passed from generation to generation just was not a thing. Instead, what Norway used was a system called patronymics, in which your name was based on your father's first name. So if you were female, your name would be your father's first name plus daughter, so daughter of. And if you were male, it would be your father's first name plus sen. So for me, as I am the son of Richard, my name would have been David Richardson. But then, had I had children, say a Jack and a Jill, they would be Jack Davidson and Jill Davidsdatter. So nothing stays consistent between generations, which makes genealogical research, it just adds an extra layer of complexity. It wasn't until 1923 that a law was passed requiring each family to adopt a permanent hereditary surname. Most chose a patronymic. So immigrants who were assimilating into American culture, which used surnames, had to adopt one. So their options most often were either what's referred to as a frozen patronymic, where you'd say, okay, Dad's patronymic right now is Svensson, so we're going to be Swensons forever. Or they would adopt the name of the farm that they came from. So our Hovick ancestors could easily have chosen Torbjornsen or Grasdalen. Any of those names could have been ours. So there are customs around naming children. There were rules. Your first daughter was named after your father's mother, and so on. There's a whole system about how to do that, and once you run out of grandparents, then you start naming children after great-grandparents, and so on. The reason for this is that it assured that the names and the memory of those people stayed in the family, that the memory of those people would not be lost. If a child died and another child of the same gender was born, the new child was often given the name of the deceased child, because if someone died, that meant that their name and everybody else who had come before them with that name, that would fall out of the family. And similarly, if someone lost a spouse and later remarried, and then with the second spouse had a child of the gender of the late spouse, if that makes sense, that child was often named after that late spouse. Again, for the same reason about names staying in rotation. And we have examples of both of those in our family. So let's dive in. So before they were Hovicks, they were the family who lived at Grasdalen, which is a subdivision of the Hovick farm. And there they are. So we are talking about the Hovick family who settled in Madison, Minnesota, 7 siblings and their mother who emigrated from Norway between 1877 and 1889. So from the oldest, Hilda on the left, Esther on the right, then your grandfather, Nels, Andrew, my grandfather, Charles, Tom, and Ida. And their mother, of course, was Inger. And I love this photo. This is Inger and her grandchildren around 1909. That's Beata and Sophie in the back. The little one in the corner is my Aunt Mildred. And then the other 3 are Nels's children, Noah, Amelia, and Hiram. And then, of course, just, the greatest social event of this season, the double wedding that took place in 1904. Charles and Nels. And there are 3 of their siblings who were in the wedding party. Their brides, Pauline, my grandmother, and Susan, and then everybody else in the party. So it's important to know that everybody Americanized their given name. They did not, in America, they did not go by the name that they were born with. Hilda was born Brønla, which is a variant of Brunhilda, so Hilda makes sense. It wasn't a long jump to adopt that name. Esther was Astrid. Nels changed a vowel. Andrew was Andreas. My grandfather Charles was Tjerand. TJ is kind of a CH sound. Tjerand. It's a very unusual name. Very few people have it in Norway. Tom was Torger, and Ida was Inga. So let's look at their family. So this is mom and dad of all those siblings, Torbjørn Andorsen and Inger Nilsdatter. So Inger, the pronunciation changed when she came. It's a soft NG in Norway, Inger, and ours are flipped, so it's Inger. And then in America it became Inger. So let's look at Inger's family. She was born on the Ørsland farm, which is now spelled Aursland, a neighboring farm to Hovick. And she was the daughter. Her name was Inger Nilsdatter, so her father was Nils Nilsen. Nils Nilsen is the Norwegian version of Nils Jr. And this is who your grandfather would have been named after. And his wife, Inger's mother, Astrid, this is who Aunt Esther was named after. Inger was the oldest of 7 children, and her dad was married a woman named Ingrid, and they had 3 children. Sadly, she died in childbirth. And this is an example. So Inger, our great-grandmother, on her baptismal record, her name is spelled Ingerid. And I believe that she was named after her father's late first wife. Her younger siblings, Inga and Bård, the double A, the O sound, Bård, and Åsa, They will play roles in the story later on, as will her brothers Torger and Sigvi, interestingly. Stuff that I just recently learned. So back now, let's look at Dad's family, Torbjørn. So Torbjørn Andorsen, so his father's going to be Andorsen, and Brønla Torbjornsdatter. So Aunt Hilda, this is who Aunt Hilda was named after. Torbjørn was the middle of 5 children. Look at the names of his 2 older siblings, Tjerand and Tjerand. This is a case of the oldest on the far left, born in 1827, died 1827. His death record says that he lived only 1/2 hour after birth. So then 2 years later, they had a boy, and he got the same name. So then his younger sibs, Sigrid and Rasmus, they will play roles as we go along too. So here we are. So here's the family all together. Torbjorn and Inger and the 7 kids. I put heavy borders around the people that you and I descend from, Nils and Charles. So for our family, those geographical divisions, they're in the county and the region of Rogaland. Municipality is Vindefjord. The parish, importantly, is Skjold. The farm is Hovick, of course, and the sub-farm, that little house where they lived, Grasdalen, which translates to Grass Valley. So there they are, down in the southwestern corner of Norway. There's Vindefjord, and then Skjold Parish is roughly the area that is circled in blue, and there's the Hovick farm. So a quick little way to find us on the map. If you go up, starting from the bottom point of the country and then start going up the west coast, that first fjord is called the Buknafjorden, and on the south side is the city of Stavanger, and on the north side is Haugesund. And then if you look at the water to the east of Haugesund, there's a cross shape. Right in between and just a little north is the Hovick farm. Here's Skjold Parish. Haugesund is in the bottom left. There's the top of that cross, and there's the Hovick farm. And there's the Ødsland farm, where Inger was born and grew up. And there's the Skjold Kirke. SKJ and the KI combination, those are all SH sounds. Skjold Kirke. And the farm sits on the Olfjorden, which you've all seen. I took this on the walk to the house. So here's the church. The current church is over on the right, the white, and they kept, thankfully, the foundations of the church that was built in 1887. The new church was built in the 1990s. Our family all left Skjold Parish in 1888, so they would have worshipped in that building pictured on the left. And I was so moved to be able to do this.
This is incredible.
We went there to the church.
We did, yeah.
Oh, it's amazing. It's amazing. So the cemetery there, I may be going over stuff you know. Burial customs, embalming was not practiced back then, and it is even still rare today. People would be buried, and after 20 years, there would be absolutely nothing left. And so graves were reused and the stone markers were destroyed. Torbjorn, dad of our family in question, he died in 1881. He was buried there somewhere, but there's no way to know. So we've all had our pictures taken by this sign. Oh my gosh, that was so exciting to come upon. Harold and his wife own the Hovick farm. It's the brother and sister who actually own the Grasdalen house.
Okay.
And the brother had just died like a week or two before we got there in 2016. Harold had the bulletin from his funeral. Harold, I don't know if you went into his house and they invited us in. The pictures on the wall, this Ariel Helgesen and his wife Anna Maria Jonsdatter. Ariel is the former owner of the farm, and that's who our family would have worked for. And that is his trunk. It is massive. It is, I don't know, 6-8 feet long. And someday, when I have some disposable income, which is not now, but I want to commission a rose mauler to recreate that panel. I think that's so beautiful. So I'll just whip through this stuff since we've all been there. There's a map of the farm. Here's an aerial view, and it is so striking how most of the farm is stone. And there's the little triangle of land on which our house stands. And I think that dot to the right, I think that's roughly where we parked, and then we walked over to get to the house.
Yeah.
And I just did up this little floor plan, entry room, living room to the right, kitchen in the back, bedroom to the left, and then the stairway that led up to the sleeping loft, which is the attic.
And the doorway outside was so low.
Yeah, oh my gosh, oh my gosh.
I hit my head a couple of
Disgusting.
So I was really trying to hold myself together here at this point.
I didn't go.
You didn't, okay.
So there's the living room.
There were things I wanted to take.
I know, truly. And the low ceilings, and those Hovick men were tall.
They were.
And then right here, you probably don't hear the audio from my video, but I'm telling Harold, oh, I have a picture of my mom with that cradle.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. And there she is.
Oh, look at that.
Back in 1978, this was, oh, I'm getting choked up. This was one of the happiest days of her life. She was so thrilled.
Well, look how everyone's so dressed up.
I know. Mom and Dad just laughed about the walk, and it trying to trudge, that mile to get to the house and in nice shoes, and oh Lord. The woman there is Harold's mother.
Okay.
And here's more about the house. There's that logo that you got, Stephen.
Yeah.
Information about the house that we all know. Here's ruins of the boathouse. This was still standing at the time of my parents' visit in '78, but had since fallen. And this, my friends, Stephen, your mom brought this back and sent it to my mom.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah, yeah. So thank you, Barb. Oh my gosh.
Well, and I brought back a bunch more.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, because I've got one. Yeah.
Oh, that's fabulous. Good. All right, so let's dive into the records. So Norway, oh my gosh, Norway has undertaken this huge project of digitizing every page of every church parish record book and made it available online. And so I have been able to get really intimately acquainted with, in particular, these 4 volumes of the Skjold record books. And here's a sample page. Most of them have pre-printed column headings, and then would be filled in by the parish priest. Zooming in, this is Torbjørn's baptismal record. So this is Dad of our 7 siblings.
Okay.
He was born, I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. He was born on the 17th of March in 1833. And notice the spelling variation, this with an O, with an H rather, sorry. So the next column is 1833, the 7th of April, that's the baptismal date. Now here, with all this stuff crossed out, so the priest started to write HMD, which is Husman, Ariel Torbjornsen, and wife, oops, made a mistake, crossed it off, and started over. HMD, Husman, Andorsen, and wife, Brønla Torbjornsdatter of Hovick. Then the next column is the witnesses. That next column is just a cross-reference to somewhere else in the book. And then this last column I only had got translated. There are these amazing Facebook groups for folks doing Norwegian genealogy, and you can post links to these individual records and ask people, can someone please make out? Because the handwriting can be such a challenge to read. Yeah. And there are people on both sides of the Atlantic that are members of these groups, and people will weigh in, and someone came to my aid and said, oh, that word is hjemmedopt, which means home baptism. Oh. Yeah. So this text over here, this is translated and transcribed from all those columns. Baptized at home on Monday, the 25th of March, 1833, by Ariel Torbjørnsen, who's this guy that started to get his name written in. He was someone else from elsewhere on the Hovick farm. So home baptisms were done when it was feared that the child wasn't going to live until they were baptized in church on a Sunday. So my assumption based on that is that he was born sickly. And as we know about later in life, the family was on welfare for years before his death, presumably because of health problems. And then he died at the age of 48. So our great-grandfather was not blessed with good health, it seems. So now here's Inger's baptism. 5 years later, 1838, she was born on the 19th of August in 1838, baptized on the 2nd of September. Here her name is spelled Ingerid. The D in the next column is ditto, meaning the column is it a legitimate or illegitimate birth? Hers was legitimate, which parenthetically, I hate that term. Parents, Nils Nilsson and Astrid Torgersdatter of Ortsland Farm, and there are the witnesses. This is Inger's home. So Inger's father was a farm owner, and in marrying Torbjorn, who was a tenant farmer, she was marrying into a lower social class. So it must have been love, I hope. So here's Inger's smallpox vaccination. So I referred earlier to the vaccinations. So Norway took this very seriously. You had to be vaccinated as a very young child, and you were given a certificate at that point, which you had to hold on to. You needed to show that in order to get confirmed, in order to get married, and in order to obtain reputable employment. You had to prove to others that you were not a danger. So they took this very seriously. So Inger Nilsdatter, daughter is often abbreviated DAT or DR or DTR. Daughter of Nils Nilsson of Ortsland. And Ariel Torbjornsen, the one who performed the home baptism on Torbjorn, was the one who administered the vaccination. So he was a busy man. Here's Torbjorn's confirmation. They included a column way over on the right there, religious knowledge and diligence. Oh, it's even actually it's further off. It's cut off of this image. But he was deemed good in all things.
Oh, okay.
I'm not going to spend a lot of time on each of these records because they're very similar. Here's Inger's confirmation in 1852. And here's their marriage in 1862. They were married on the 12th of June, 1862. The groom is bachelor and tenant farmer's son, Torbjørn Andorsen, residence Hovick, age 29. Father was Andreas, and the bride was maiden Inger Nilsdatter of Ortsland, age 24. Father Nils Nilsson. And here's their first child, 1 year later, Brønla. And if you look at the list of witnesses, the second name there, Ariel Helgesen, that's the owner of the farm, the pictures, the owner of the trunk.
Yeah.
And then Rasmus and Sigrid are Torbjorn's siblings, and Åsa Nilsdatter is Inger's sister. So her aunts and uncle served as witnesses. I've been told that it's different from our concept of godparents, that often there was no significance to the people who were there, that sometimes it was just people who happened to be at church that Sunday and were willing to stand up and witness. I don't think there was the kind of covenant relationship thing that we have with godparents. Here's Brønla's vaccination. Now, and Esther, Astrid, baptism in 1865. Now, here is the census of 1865, and it's hard to read, so I did this. So, at the farm Grasdalen, there's Torbjørn and Inger. He was 33, she was 28. And at that point, they had two daughters, Brønla and Astrid. And living with them now is Bård and Åsa. Bård, age 15, was a servant boy and farmhand. Åsa was a servant girl and childcare, like a live-in babysitter. She was 12 years old. And those are Inger's youngest siblings. And then the next two, Rasmus and Sigrid, these are Torbjorn's siblings. Rasmus was 23, was a lodger in their home, and worked as a school teacher. And Sigrid was a lodger, and she was a tailor, and she was 30 years old. So that was their household in 1865. They had 3 cattle and 19 sheep, and they planted oats and potatoes. Oh, and yep, siblings. So also discovered in the 1865 census, I was curious as to why, as young as 12 years old, her littlest sister would be out of the house and living elsewhere and working. So Inger's father, Nils, died in February of that year, and by the end of December, the date that the census was taken was December 31st. They were no longer listed on the Ortsland farm, and I had to search for them, and finally found them in Haugesund. So it turns out that after Dad died, the decision was made to send the youngest 2 to go live with their oldest sister, Inger, and then Mom, Astrid, Nils's widow, and the 4 other older siblings were living on the Hasseløen Island in Haugesund. So the family split. Her brother Torger and Sigvi were ship carpenters. They had gotten into the fishing industry, which, stay tuned, there's more about that to come. So Inger's birth family in 1865, from the Ortsland farm, Mom and 4 kids go to Haugesund, and the 2 youngest kids go to Hovick. Here's a map of Haugesund, and the island on which they lived is that one right there, Hasseløya. And this is a picture of Inger's mother, Astrid. That's the furthest back that we have any photos. Now, continuing on with the kids. So that was the grandmother, Astrid. Now this is little child, Astrid. Her smallpox vaccination. She was 1 year old. Now here's Nils's baptism. He is one of only 2 of the 7 kids were given a middle name, Nils Andreas. And I haven't been able to find in my research any Andreases further upstream. So I don't know where that came from, but it must have been meaningful enough for them to name one of give one of their children that as a middle name, and then Nils's younger brother was Andreas. So I don't know if it was a friend. Yeah. Rasmus and Sigrid again are witnesses at Nels's baptism, and then Andreas comes along in 1871. Again, Rasmus and Sigrid. And here's my grandfather's baptism in 1873. Again, Rasmus and Sigrid, witnesses. I think this is the only coin that was minted in the year that my grandfather was born, and so I found on eBay a couple 3 skilling coins.
Oh, that's cool.
And then Torger, this is Uncle Tom, born in 1875. Again, Rasmus and Sigrid there. And here's the 1875 census. For Dad, for Torbjørn, it says husman med jord, tenant farmer with land. And then it says delvis fattigunderstøttet, which means partial poverty support.
Oh, really?
So welfare of some kind. In the household now, outside of their immediate family, is just Sigrid, whose name is sometimes spelled Siri. So just Torbjorn's sister living with them. And now the kids start to get confirmed. Here's Brønla. Then Inga, this is Aunt Ida. She's the other kid with given a middle name. Astrid's confirmation. Now, in 1881, Torbjorn dies. We don't know of what cause of death was not listed in records this early, but Mildred in her book writes that they have speculated, given the nature of his death, that he died of a ruptured appendix.
Okay.
Which is a sudden onset kind of thing. So that doesn't explain the welfare support, whether or not he had been of frail health for years before that.
Mm-hmm.
That's something we're not going to know. I just thought it was interesting to note the ages when Dad died. She was 48. She was 43. And 3 teenagers and 4 kids 10 and under. It's really hard to run a farm. So here's your grandpa's confirmation in 1882. Andreas's confirmation in 85. Censuses were done irregularly. There was one done only in certain areas, and there wasn't for Skjold Parish, but it was done in Haugesund. And the census in 1885 has Brønla, having left the farm, moved to Haugesund, and she was working for a shipbuilder named Halvor Vig, which makes me wonder about Kristen Wiig from Saturday Night Live, wondering if there's some connection there. It's such an unusual name. I've never seen it anywhere else. So presumably Brønla, being of working age now, is working to help support her family back at the farm. And the census has her living on Risøya Island, the one, the lower one. The upper one, Hasseløy, that's where others in the family lived in 1865, but this is now Brønla in 1885, living there. This is a painting by Adolf Tiedemann. There was a Norwegian romanticism movement that kind of swept the 19th century, and Tiedemann does these beautiful romanticized paintings of peasant life. And this one is called The Youngest Son's Farewell. It was common for folks in our social class that around the age of confirmation, 14 or 15, that's when young people would leave home and start to earn their own living. And so by the time of my grandpa's confirmation in 1887, he was 14 years old, and he was now working on the Hovick farm, which there are 2 farms with similarly spelled names. I'm not sure which it refers to, but he was in the neighborhood nonetheless, working by the time he was 14 years old. So here's that confirmation record, 1887.